China's lunar mission this week brought back the first fresh samples of rocks and debris from the moon in more than 4 decades. The Chang'e 5 probe touched down on the moon on December 1st and has procured the samples, which were expected to offer new insights into the moon's history. The mission is the latest in a string of space developments the world has seen this year, as countries jump into both state and commercial opportunities, from finding new resources on the moon to private passenger flights. But some fear that this is not just about scientific exploration of the world beyond our planet, but a means of bolstering military intelligence and power through extraterrestrial means. So is the world in a space race, and is there a danger of a space war? Today we're joined by 2 experts, Ram S. Jakku, Associate Professor of Law at McGill University, who is the Director of the Manual on International Law Applicable to Military Users of Outer Space, joining us from Canada. We also welcome Stephen Freeland, Emeritus Professor of International Law at Western Sydney University in Australia, who is also the Director of the International Institute of Space Law. A very good morning to you both. Good evening to you in Canada. And well, let's go straight into the discussion. Now, let's start with you, Dr. Freeland. So, China's lunar mission, which came back to Earth, what makes this mission so significant, and what scientific value could these moon rocks have?
Oh, hello, Suyong. Thank you very much. Yes, it's a very significant mission. It's the first sample return of lunar material in many decades since the Apollo mission. So from a scientific viewpoint, there's a lot to learn. We are continually learning about the history of the universe, and by analysing celestial body material, we get a much better idea of where we came from, where the Earth came from. That will allow us, of course, also to understand events here on Earth as well. So we get a much better self-understanding of who we are, and what we must do to ensure that humanity survives and prospers in the future. So it also reconnects us with celestial bodies. It reconnects us with the wonders of space. It reconnects us with the idea that essentially space is something that brings all of humanity together. We must view it in that one perspective. Obviously, as you mentioned in your introduction, there are tensions, there are differences, but the wonder and inspiration of space is that we have far more in common. It brings us together. And the Chang'e mission, along with the recently returned Hayabusa 2 mission, which actually landed here in Australia, the OSIRIS-REx mission from the United States, other missions like that, will enable us to learn more. And then ultimately, if we decide, as are the plans, that humans will eventually, and this might still be a long time from now, create human settlements on some of these celestial bodies. Clearly, we need to understand as much as we can about the moon and these other bodies so as to ensure that we can actually set up those settlements in a peaceful way, in a sustainable way, and obviously in a way that will allow the humans that are there to live and survive and perhaps prosper. Technologically also, this is very significant because it's extremely complex to have this sort of mission. It's been done a long time ago. It hasn't been done since. There have been attempts to have soft landings on the moon since, which have not been successful. The Chang'e 5 mission was carried out impeccably, as was the Hayabusa 2 mission that I mentioned as well. And so it's showing that technologically we are making progress. But space is hard, and we still have a long way to go.
Right, but scientists are very excited about unpacking all of this, what this mission has brought back. And Dr. Jakku, I want to hear your thoughts on this as well. What does Chang'e 5, the Chang'e 5 mission, what does it tell us about the speed or determination of China's aim to grow as a space power?
Well, it's very important. I just agree with what Stephen mentioned, internationally and scientifically. I think from within China, it's very important for them to have this pride, achieving something which has not done for 44 years in the world, and also that they are already planned a few other missions in that line. So I think internally it's quite important within China.
Right, and Dr. Jaku, now countries and businesses, including those in China and of course the United States, other countries too like Australia, India, they're very eager to get into the space business, not only in terms of providing travel or things like that, but also to get their hands on the moon's abundant resources. And this year there have been growing investments in the space mining sector, and countries like Luxembourg and Canada, they're also easing laws to really propel commercial efforts. And of course, NASA this year also launched an effort to even pay companies to mine resources on the moon. So really, when do you see this market sort of taking off, and how big do you think the space market looks?
Well, this is what they call is a $6 million question. Nobody knows how much metals or minerals can be found and how much can be brought, but it is a big thing. People are talking about not only billions but trillions of dollars. In that, of course, you need technical capability to go and explore and process the metals and bring back to work. That's one thing. Second thing is the question of what will be the demand on Earth, or what metals can be brought. So in a number of ways, it's a big thing. Though it's very difficult to give a sort of dollar figure to that. But also, I think more importantly, to start with, rather than the market, I think it will be tremendous value for missions on the moon and beyond moons. In situ processing utilization of the resources is going to be huge and very useful to our space exploring nations.
And Dr. Freeland, how do you see the corporate opportunities? Do you see these ventures booming anytime soon? And actually, does anyone really have propriety or mining rights in space? I mean, we've seen companies like Lunar Embassy, for instance, which actually sells plots of land on the moon. But do we have rights on the moon to actually claim parts of the moon and start mining them?
Well, that's an excellent question, and it really gets down to the fundamentals of how we view space. As I think both Professor Jaku and myself would say, space is an area that essentially we all have a stake in. So we've categorized space from a legal perspective, and that's been accepted right from the beginning at the geopolitical level. Even amongst countries that on Earth were antagonists, all agree that space is not an area that can be what we call appropriated. So countries cannot claim space for their own. That also, because of the legal frameworks, means that private companies like the Lunar Embassy, notwithstanding the fact that they might say they own some property or whatever, those claims are without any legal foundation. The point about resources that Ram made, of course, the potential is there. And many people are getting seduced by the idea of trillions and trillions of dollars literally worth of resources. But we have to be very careful that we don't skew the way we think about space as something simply to exploit. Space is so multifaceted, it provides so many benefits, it allows the whole of the world to prosper in a way that would be unthinkable without the use of satellites. But if we start changing the view about space and just saying it's simply an area that we exploit, it's simply an area that we take from, one, that will give rise to the possibilities of conflict, because on Earth, when people go for resources, that has inevitably led to conflicts about resources, and we have to, at all costs, avoid any conflict in space. But more fundamentally, of course, we must make sure that we don't create irreversible damage to space, because the thing about space, the physics of space, the environment of space, are so unique that if we move down a path of irresponsible behavior, of not carefully calibrated, multilaterally agreed standards of practice, then we run a risk of creating what might be termed a tragedy of the commons, which will compromise everybody's ability to utilize space, every country on Earth, for this generation, for future generations. simply put, we really have to avoid making some of the mistakes that we've made on Earth when we look at space. So resources and the exploitation of resources, of course, that's interesting. Industry is claiming all of these capabilities. It's technologically incredibly challenging. But as those technologies begin to be developed, we need to have broad discussions on all of the implications, not just the economic and commercial implications about what we're doing, so that if we do pursue these activities, and it looks as if ultimately, and this is still a long way away, we will look to do this, then we need to do it carefully to maintain safety, security, and sustainability.
Right, so we really need to think about sustainability going forward, and well,
Exactly.
it is getting rather crowded up there in space as well, with all these satellites going up. And Dr. Jaku, there's really little distinction between China's civilian and military space programs, which has fueled quite a lot of suspicions about Beijing's space ambitions. The US Defense Intelligence Agency, they warned last year that China is likely to field a ground-based laser weapon that could counter low-orbit space-based sensors, or even field higher power systems that could even damage the structures of satellites. If a country is able to use these kind of weaponry or counter-satellite technology in lunar orbit, then what could they be capable of doing down here on Earth?
Well, that's a very, very good question. I think what we should keep in mind that all space technologies and systems, except some minor systems, they're all dual-purpose technologies. So if they can be used for commercial or civilian purposes, they can also be used for military purposes. And that is a danger. And that danger could be avoided with the transparency, openness, and cooperation, so that countries are in a position to know what is happening in other countries, and they should be asked to share the information. For that, I think it's very important for some kind of understanding among all the countries, especially spacefaring nations, to be transparent. And that's very important. But I may also add to that, I think it is not only the major spacefaring nations, but I think middle powers like South Korea, Canada, Australia, they should also be very much concerned about it. And they should be pushing far more transparency and trying to make sure that everybody knows what is happening. That is a problem. And you just named the countries, those who are planning and making efforts to go to moon. I think it's a matter of concern for humanity that these competing interests may not result in kind of conflicts. And those conflicts and possible wars must be avoided. And the only way to avoid those is having a transparent system of knowing who is doing what.
But of course, there has been quite a lack of transparency, I suppose, from the Chinese side. And Dr. Freeland, well, the same question goes to you, really. As China is increasingly rolling out its commercial network technology in what we would see as illiberal democracies and authoritarian regimes, it's been launching communications and surveillance satellites for nations like Venezuela, Laos, Nigeria and Algeria. Should we be really worried about this? And do you think there is this rather there's a competitive space race in the making between the United States and China?
Well, it's true to say that that all of the major spacefaring nations, so clearly that includes China, but it includes other countries, well-known countries, the United States, Russia, India, France, the United Kingdom, etc. All of those countries, and indeed others, are utilizing space. They recognize that space has tremendous strategic value. They perceive space as having tremendous value in terms of protecting their national security. And so all of these countries and others are doing everything they can to maximize the way they use space to, in a sense, promote their own interests, and that will involve, of course, surveillance, as well as all of the other things you mentioned. And it gets to the point of how we view space. And one of the issues, and this is quite a straightforward issue, but one of the issues that is important, and this goes with the transparency that Professor Jaku was talking about, is the language of space. You might think that's quite a simple thing, but it's so fundamental. And more recently, in the more recent years, we've had a rhetoric of space that, in a sense, is highlighting the differences between us. It's transporting terrestrial, if I may put it, terrestrial tensions into this unique environment of space, and just saying, well, space is no different from any other area. It's potentially, some say, a war-fighting domain. Well, clearly, notwithstanding that that's contrary to the legal frameworks that we have for space, it's contrary to the understanding of all of the countries in the way we developed the frameworks that we operate in space. It also takes us to a path that may be irreversible. So we need, in the way we view space, to recognizing, as Ram said, that clearly it's a dual-use domain. Clearly, countries will always rely on space to protect their interests, but they can do that, but still highlight more the common interests we have, the humanity that space represents, the fact that essentially we're in a stewardship position of space because we have, if we go the wrong way, the potential to actually destroy space as we know it. So all of those issues mean that in the end, the major countries, notwithstanding the fact that clearly they will beat their chest, they will promote their national interests, there will be rhetoric, they need to understand that it's in their interest, because if we do get it wrong in space, the ones that suffer the most, and this is the really interesting point, the ones that will suffer the most if we get it wrong in space are indeed those major countries, because they have been able to utilize space with their tremendous technology for their significant advantage for a whole range of purposes. But if we begin to compromise the way that countries can use space, they are the most dependent on space and therefore become the most vulnerable. So it's important that people recognize that, notwithstanding the fact that we have differences, we need to look at space in a way that involves cooperation.
Right, and as you said, language really matters there, but we have noticed perhaps both the US and China using more of a militaristic approach to the language when it comes to space development, seeing it as a means of strengthening national security and defending against enemies, those kind of rhetoric as well. Dr. Jaku, well, we saw a great amount of commitment coming from the Chinese side in terms of developing their technology and aiming to become a world space power. And President Trump as well, he was also showing a lot of ambition in terms of space technology. But what do we know about the incoming Biden administration? As well, some scientists are concerned that he's going to focus more on affairs down here on Earth rather than in the world beyond our planet.
Well, that's what is understood. That's what one see from the platform Biden-Harris team. That is expected. But I don't think Biden administration will close down its shop on space. I think they will continue. They will concentrate more on the civilian side rather than the military side. At least that is what is expected of that. And I think that's a good sign. So this is what I see. If I can make a point which Stephen was mentioning, as you also alluded to the point, I think if there is a conflict in space, of course countries those who will be at war or conflict will suffer. But I am more concerned about countries like South Korea or Canada or Australia, because they will also be victims of that. The war in space is not going to be limited to the fighting countries. It will have tremendous negative impact on everybody. So that's what I will say. It is in the interest of all other countries,
so really it's
the spacefaring regions, to be concerned about this problem.
So really, it's not just a spectacle that well, we as the public should just sit back and watch. But it's really something that other countries need to really participate and call for transparency, as you both mentioned, in really thinking about the sustainability of space technology and space development. Well, I'm afraid this is where we're going to have to end the discussion today. But that was Ram S. Jaku at McGill University and Stephen Freeland at Western Sydney University, joining us from Montreal and Sydney. Thank you both so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
And to our viewers, as always, thank you for watching.